Is that him? After all this time, he finally returns.
The village rested between two low hills, shaped by time and habit more than hope. From a distance, it looked calm and complete. Mud houses stood in neat rows. Narrow paths curved like old scars through fields that had been worked for generations. Each morning followed the same rhythm, as steady as a heartbeat. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Roosters crowed. Children swept yards while their mothers watched in silence. Everything had its place and everyone knew where they belonged. At the center of the village stood the old fig tree. Beneath it, the elders gathered each day, sitting on worn stools, their voices slow and firm. They spoke of rules, of tradition, of how things had always been done. No one argued with them. Their words carried weight, not because they were always right, but because they were never questioned. Below them were the farmers, men with cracked hands and tired eyes. They worked the land from dawn until the sun burned low, hoping for rain, fearing drought. The village respected their labor but not their struggle. As long as the fields produced, their suffering did not matter. Women moved quietly through it all. They cooked, cleaned, carried water, and bore children. Their voices rarely rose above a whisper. Their pain was expected, their strength taken for granted. When they spoke, it was often after decisions had already been made. And then there were the others. The poor. The widowed. The sick. The ones who had fallen behind. They were not cursed or shouted at. They were something worse. They were ignored. Beggars did not last long in the village. If one appeared, people turned their faces away. Doors closed faster. Children were pulled inside. It was not hatred that pushed the beggars out, but fear mixed with comfort. Fear that misfortune might spread. Comfort in believing that hardship belonged only to others. The village told itself this was order, that this was how peace was kept. But beneath the routine, something fragile trembled. On the far edge of the village lived a woman named Mara. Her house stood where the last path faded into dry earth. It was small, with walls cracked by time and a roof patched more times than she could remember. No one visited unless they had to. Some said she preferred it that way. Others said she had been pushed there long ago and never returned. Mara lived alone. She rose before dawn and slept late into the night. She spoke little and listened much. Her face held a quiet stillness, but her eyes carried a weight that never left them. Once she had been like the others. She had laughed. She had belonged. That was before the loss. No one spoke openly about it, but everyone remembered. A moment when Mara had needed help and the village had turned away. Some said it was shame that followed her. Others said grief had hollowed her out. The truth lived somewhere between regret and silence. After that day, Mara stopped asking for anything. She stopped attending gatherings. She stopped sitting beneath the fig tree. She built her life smaller, narrower, safer. Pain could not reach you as easily when you stayed on the edge. Sometimes in the early evening, Mara stood in her doorway and watched the village from afar. She saw neighbors laugh together. She saw elders nod with satisfaction. She also saw what others refused to notice. A woman dragging firewood alone because no one offered help. A child begging for scraps near the market and being chased away. A stranger passing through, eyes tired, feet bare, leaving hungry and unseen. Each time, something tightened inside her chest. She understood the village better than it understood itself. She knew how fear hid behind tradition. How cruelty hid behind rules. How silence became a kind of agreement. The village told itself it was peaceful. But peace built on denial cracked easily. On certain nights, when the wind blew hard and the darkness felt heavier than usual, Mara felt it clearly. The sense that something was waiting. That the order everyone trusted was thinner than they believed. The elders spoke often of keeping the village pure, safe, unchanged. But change had already arrived, quietly. It lived in the spaces between people. In the way eyes slid away from suffering. In the way doors closed too fast. Mara carried her own wounds quietly, but they had sharpened her sight. She knew what it meant to be unseen. She knew how it felt to stand before a closed door, heart pounding, hope shrinking with every second. The village did not mean to be cruel. That was its greatest lie. It simply chose comfort over compassion, every single day. As dusk fell that evening, the village settled into itself once more, unaware that the fragile peace it guarded so tightly was about to be tested. Unaware that a single night and a single choice would soon force it to see what it had worked so hard to ignore. And at the edge of the village, Mara closed her door, not knowing that before morning she would stand at the center of a story that would change everything. The sun sank low behind the hills, leaving the village wrapped in a dull orange glow. Evening came quickly as it often did, pulling shadows long across the paths. Doors began to shut. Fires were lit. Voices softened. The village prepared itself for another quiet night, believing nothing unexpected would come. That was when the beggar appeared. He came from the narrow road beyond the fields, walking slowly as if each step required careful thought. His body leaned forward, shoulders bent under an invisible weight. A thin stick supported his trembling hand. His clothes hung loose and torn, darkened by dust and old rain. His sandals were worn so thin that his feet barely felt protected from the stones beneath them. Yet despite all this, there was something steady about him. His eyes did not beg. They observed. They carried exhaustion, yes, but also dignity, the kind that hardship could not fully crush. He did not shout for help or stretch out his hands. He simply walked, trusting the village would see him. It did not. The first house he passed shut its door before he could speak. A woman peeked through a crack, her eyes widening, then disappearing. Further along, a man stood outside his home, paused when he noticed the stranger, and quickly turned away, pretending to fix his gait. Whispers followed the beggar like shadows. Who is he? Why is he here? Trouble comes with people like that. Children were pulled indoors. Lamps dimmed. The village grew smaller around him, tighter, colder. Each refusal drained what little strength he had left. His steps slowed. His breathing grew heavier. By the time he reached the edge of the village, the sky had darkened fully. Clouds gathered above, thick and heavy, pressing down like a warning. Mara was inside her house when she heard him. It was not a voice or a knock. It was the sound of a body stumbling, followed by a soft thud against the earth. A sound too quiet to alarm others, but loud enough to echo in her chest. She froze. Her heart began to race, each beat sharp and sudden. She moved toward the door without thinking, then stopped. Her hand hovered inches from the wood. Outside, the beggar lay near her doorstep. His body curled slightly as if trying to protect itself from the cold ground. His chest rose and fell unevenly. Rain began to fall, light at first, tapping against the roof. Mara leaned her forehead against the door. Fear rose quickly. Not fear of the man, but fear of memory. Of what helping him might awaken. Of what not helping him would confirm. She remembered another night. Another closed door. Another moment when she had hoped someone would see her pain and choose differently. Her breath caught. The village was silent now. No footsteps approached. No voices questioned. Everyone had already decided. The beggar was not their problem. Mara felt the weight of that decision press against her walls. She could open the door. She could call out. She could bring him inside. The thought made her chest tighten. Doing so would mean being seen again. Judged again. It would mean stepping back into a world she had spent years avoiding. Or she could stay still. Say nothing. Let the night decide. The rain grew heavier. Wind rattled the door gently as if urging her to move. Mara stepped back, then forward again. Her hands trembled. Her thoughts tangled. She told herself she had nothing to give. That she was not strong enough. That the village had made its choice long ago, and she was not meant to change it. Outside, the beggar shifted weakly, letting out a low sound that was almost a sigh. Something inside her broke. She did not open the door. But she did not push him away. Instead, she lit a small lamp and set it near the door, letting its warm glow spill through the cracks. It was a quiet signal. A way of saying she saw him even if she could not yet face him. She sat on the floor, her back against the wall, listening to the rain and the uneven rhythm of his breathing. Every sound tied them together, two lives divided by wood and fear. The night stretched on. The village slept, unaware of the struggle unfolding at its edge. Doors remained shut. Dreams stayed undisturbed. Order remained intact. But at Mara's doorstep, a choice had been made. Small, silent, uncertain. She had allowed the beggar to remain. And though she did not yet know it, that single act of hesitation, that refusal to turn him away, had already begun to loosen the grip of the village's long-held denial. As the rain soaked the ground and darkness settled deeper, Mara closed her eyes and whispered a promise to herself she had not made in years. Not tonight. Tonight she would not look away. The night did not pass quickly. Time stretched and thinned, each moment pressing heavily against Mara's chest. She sat on the floor just inside her door, knees drawn close, the small lamp beside her casting a weak circle of light. Beyond the wood, the world felt close and distant all at once. Every sound outside reached her clearly as if the door were no barrier at all. The beggar breathed in shallow, uneven bursts. Each breath made her flinch. Each pause made her heart stop. The rain grew heavier, striking the roof with sharp insistence. Cold crept through the cracks in the walls, settling into her bones. Mara pulled her shawl tighter around herself, but the chill she felt had little to do with the weather. She closed her eyes and the past rushed in. She saw herself younger, standing in the same village, her hands shaking, her voice barely holding together. She remembered the words she had spoken then, simple and desperate. How she had asked for help. How faces had turned away. How doors had closed in careful silence. That night had changed her. She had learned how easily people could pretend not to see suffering. How pain became lighter when it belonged to someone else. The memory burned still, sharp and clear, no matter how many years had passed. A soft cough came from outside. Mara's eyes flew open. Her breath caught in her throat. She pressed her hand against her mouth, fighting the urge to cry out. The sound was weak, fragile, like something breaking. The storm answered with a sudden gust of wind that rattled the door hard enough to make the lamp flicker. Rain slipped beneath the threshold, darkening the dirt floor. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady. Her hand reached for the door latch, then froze. Opening the door meant more than warmth and shelter. It meant stepping back into a world that had wounded her deeply. It meant risking rejection again, even if this time she was the one offering help. She was not ready. But she could not do nothing. Mara moved to the small shelf near her hearth. She filled a clay cup with water, her hands trembling so badly that some spilled onto the floor. She folded an old blanket, thin but clean, the kind she kept for colder nights. Her heart pounded as she returned to the door. She opened it just enough to slip the cup and blanket through the narrow gap. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet earth and rain. For a brief moment she saw him clearly. The beggar lay curled on his side, his face pale and drawn. His beard was soaked, his hair clinging to his skin. His eyes opened slowly, surprised, confused, then soft with something like gratitude. Their eyes met. It lasted only a heartbeat. Mara closed the door again, her back pressing hard against it as if it might push back. Her breath came fast and shallow. She slid down until she was sitting on the floor once more. Outside there was movement. The soft scrape of fabric. A faint sound as the blanket was pulled closer. Then the sound of drinking, slow and careful. Tears burned in her eyes. She did not know why they came so suddenly. Perhaps because the distance between kindness and cruelty was smaller than she had believed. Perhaps because for the first time in years she had stepped across it, even if only slightly. The storm raged through the night. Wind howled between the houses. Rain battered the earth without mercy. Mara barely slept. Each time her eyes closed, she woke again at the slightest sound. She listened to his breathing, counting it, praying silently that it would not stop. At one point, the village bell rang faintly in the distance, stirred by the wind. The sound echoed through the dark, lonely and hollow. Mara wondered if anyone else lay awake, troubled by the night. She doubted it. The village was good at sleeping through discomfort. Hours passed. The rain slowly eased, leaving behind a deep, aching cold. The silence that followed felt heavier than the storm. Mara rose again and stood by the door, her hand resting against the wood. On the other side, the beggar remained still. Fear clenched her chest. She leaned close, listening. Then she heard it. A breath. Weak but there. Relief washed over her, leaving her shaky and exhausted. She returned to her place by the lamp and waited for morning. By the time the sky began to pale, both of them had survived the night. They were separated by a door left deliberately half-closed, close enough to share warmth through the cracks, distant enough to protect old wounds. Mara knew this could not last. With the coming dawn would come eyes, voices, judgment. Choices would no longer be quiet or hidden. She rested her head against the wall, watching the light slowly change. The night had tested her. The morning would demand more. The village began to wake before the sun. It started with a single pair of footsteps on a dirt path, then another. A woman stepped outside to throw water from a basin and froze when she noticed the shape near Mara's door. She leaned closer, squinting in the dim light, then pulled back sharply as if burned. Her whisper traveled faster than her feet. By the time the sky had shifted from black to deep blue, others had seen it too. A body. A stranger. Curled on the ground at the edge of the village. Voices stayed low, but they spread quickly, passing from doorway to doorway like smoke. Did you see him? He's still there. At her house. Mara heard them through her walls. She sat stiffly near the door, the lamp now dim and nearly empty of oil. Her body ached from the long night, but sleep had never truly come. Every whisper outside landed like a knock she was not ready to answer. The beggar stirred weakly. His breathing had grown rougher, each breath sounding like effort rather than habit. His skin felt cold when Mara pressed her palm gently against the door, imagining the chill seeping into him from the ground. Outside, a small group gathered at a careful distance. No one approached too closely. They stood with arms crossed, faces tight, eyes sharp with suspicion. Some recognized Mara's house at once. Why is he there? She always brings trouble. She should have chased him away. Old grudges surfaced easily. Memories twisted by time and fear. It was easier to blame her than to face what they had all done the night before. As the light grew stronger, the elders were summoned. They arrived wrapped in heavy cloth, their expressions stern and unreadable. They did not look at the beggar at first. They looked at the house. At the closed door. One elder spoke softly, but his words carried. This should not have been allowed. Another nodded. Strangers bring sickness. They bring unrest. Murmurs of agreement followed. No one mentioned that every one of them had turned the man away. The beggar shifted again, letting out a weak, broken sound. His chest rose and fell unevenly. His lips had begun to pale. Mara felt panic surge through her. She stood, her legs stiff, her heart pounding. Every part of her wanted to open the door, to step out and kneel beside him. But fear held her back. Fear of their eyes. Fear of their words. Fear of being pushed back into silence. The village had already decided who she was. Outside, the debate continued. Leave him, someone said. He'll move on. He won't last long in this cold, another replied. Silence followed that truth. Heavy. Uncomfortable. The beggar's breathing worsened. Mara pressed her hand against her chest, fighting the urge to scream. She remembered the sound of her own breath on that night long ago, how it had come shallow and desperate, how she had waited for someone to notice. No one had. Her fingers curled into a fist. The sky began to lighten at the horizon, a thin line of pale gold cutting through the darkness. Dawn approached, slow and patient, as if giving her one last moment to decide. Mara moved to the door. Her hand rested on the latch. The wood felt cold, solid, unyielding. Beyond it waited judgment and consequence. But beyond it also waited a man who might not survive much longer. The whispers outside grew louder as they noticed her shadow shift. She's awake. What will she do? She won't dare. Mara closed her eyes. She took a slow, shaking breath. For years she had lived small to avoid pain. She had hidden at the edge so no one could hurt her again. But the cost of that safety now lay at her doorstep, gasping quietly for life. The beggar let out another weak sound, barely more than air. That was enough. Mara's fingers tightened around the latch. The elders fell silent. The village held its breath. The sun had not yet risen, but the night was ending. And with it, the excuse of darkness. Mara stood still for a heartbeat longer, feeling the weight of every choice she had ever made press down on her. Then, slowly, she began to open the door. The coming dawn would see everything. The door opened with a soft creak that seemed far too loud in the quiet morning. Cool air rushed inside, carrying the smell of wet earth and fading rain. Pale light spilled across the floor, gentle but revealing. Mara stepped out slowly as if the ground might pull away beneath her feet. The beggar lay where he had fallen. He was still alive. That alone felt like a miracle. His face was gray with cold and exhaustion, his lips dry and cracked. The blanket she had given him clung to his thin body, darkened by moisture. His chest rose and fell, shallow and uneven, each breath a struggle that looked painfully deliberate. Mara knelt beside him without thinking. Her knees pressed into the damp ground, but she did not notice the cold. She placed her hand near his shoulder, careful, unsure. His skin felt cool, too cool. Fear tightened her throat. You're still here, she whispered, though she did not know why she spoke. The beggar's eyes fluttered open slightly. They were clouded with pain, but when he saw her, something softened in them. He tried to move, failed, and let out a faint sound that might have been thanks or might have been apology. Behind her, the village stirred. People had gathered during the final moments of night. Now they stood watching openly. No more shadows. No more whispers hidden by darkness. Faces lined the path, some curious, some tense, some already hardened by judgment. Mara felt their eyes on her back. She reached for the cup she had brought and tipped it gently to the beggar's lips. Water spilled at first, then slowly found its way. He swallowed with effort, coughing weakly before managing a few more sips. A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone shifted closer. Then another. The elders stood apart, their expressions tight. This was not how things were done. Kindness, especially public kindness, disrupted order. Mara felt her hands shake, but she did not stop. She adjusted the blanket, tucking it closer around the beggar's shoulders. Her movements were careful, almost reverent. She was no longer hiding. Every action was visible now, undeniable. A woman stepped forward hesitantly, holding a small cloth. "He's cold," she said quietly, as if testing the words. Mara nodded, accepting it without comment. Another villager followed, offering a small bottle of medicine. "It's not much," he muttered, eyes downcast. The shift was small, almost invisible, but it mattered. For the first time, help was not whispered through cracks in a door. It was given openly. The beggar's breathing steadied slightly as warmth and water reached him. His eyes remained half-closed, but the tight line of pain in his face eased just enough to notice. Mara looked up then, finally meeting the eyes of those watching. No anger filled her face. No challenge. Only quiet resolve. "This is a person," her silence seemed to say. "Not a problem." The elders exchanged uneasy glances. One cleared his throat. "He cannot stay outside," he said, voice stiff. "If he dies here." Mara stood. She rose slowly, her legs unsteady, her body aching from the night, but she stood tall. The crowd fell quiet. "He will not die here," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Not like this." There was no shouting. No accusation. Just truth spoken plainly. For a long moment no one moved. Then Mara bent again, slipping her arm under the beggar's shoulders. She struggled, surprised by how light he was, how fragile. Instinctively someone stepped forward to help. Then another. Together, awkward and unsure, they lifted him. Gasps broke out as they carried him across the threshold of Mara's home. The door that had stayed half-closed for years now stood wide open. Inside, the space was simple but clean. The beggar was laid gently on a mat near the hearth. The warmth of the room wrapped around him slowly, like something remembered. Mara knelt beside him again, her hands steady now. Outside, the village remained gathered, staring into the open doorway. They saw the inside of a life they had ignored. They saw care given without permission, compassion offered without approval. And it unsettled them. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Why didn't we help him before?" she asked, too loud, too honest. No one answered. More small offerings appeared. Bread, herbs, clean cloth. Each one came with hesitation, with glances toward the elders, but they came nonetheless. The beggar slept at last, his breathing deeper now, though still weak. Mara sat beside him, exhaustion washing over her in heavy waves. She felt fear still and doubt, and the sharp awareness that this choice would not be without cost. But beneath it all, something else had taken root. Relief. The village had seen. They could not pretend anymore. The sun rose fully above the hills, casting clear light over the path, the open door, the people gathered there. Morning had arrived, bright and unyielding. And with it, the fragile peace the village had clung to was cracked wide open. One act of kindness had made it impossible to look away. Nothing would return to the way it was before. The beggar did not speak all at once. For 2 days he drifted in and out of sleep, his body resting in fits, his breathing still shallow but no longer desperate. The warmth of Mara's home softened the sharpest edge of his pain, though it could not erase the years carved into his bones. Each time he woke, his eyes searched the room as if expecting it to disappear. Mara stayed close, she fed him water in careful sips. She changed the cloth on his brow. She spoke little, knowing words were not what he needed yet. Outside, villagers came and went, some leaving offerings, others only peering inside, curiosity battling discomfort. On the third morning he asked for water in a voice barely above a whisper. Mara helped him sit up, supporting his weight with her arm. His body felt fragile, like something that had been held together by will alone. After he drank, he rested back against the wall, his eyes clearer now. "You could have sent me away," he said slowly. Mara did not answer right away. She stared at the hearth, watching embers glow. "So could everyone else," she replied at last. A faint, tired smile touched his lips. That was how the truth began to surface. Not as a speech, but as pieces of memory slipping through the cracks of silence that he told her that once he had been known, respected. He had worked with his hands and his mind. People had listened when he spoke. He had belonged to a place much like this village, governed by rules and elders who claimed wisdom. Then something had gone wrong. He spoke of a decision made in secret, one that benefited a few and destroyed many. He had spoken against it. He had refused to stay silent. That refusal had cost him everything. His work was taken. His name was stained. Friends turned away, afraid to be seen standing beside him. Even family had stepped back, choosing safety over truth. "I did not fall overnight," he said quietly. "I was pushed." Mara felt each word strike something deep inside her. She knew that story. Not his exact one, but its shape. The way standing alone could become standing nowhere at all. As he spoke more, villagers began to listen. At first they stayed near the door, pretending not to hear. But the words carried. They spoke of betrayal wrapped in order, of harm justified by tradition, of suffering dismissed as necessary. Some of the elders stiffened as recognition crept in. The beggar's story mirrored parts of the village's own past. Old decisions, old victims, people who had vanished quietly and been forgotten because remembering them was uncomfortable. He did not accuse. He did not raise his voice. That was what made it harder to ignore. "I survived by moving," he said, "by not staying long enough to be broken completely. But each place I passed closed its doors the same way." Mara watched faces in the doorway shift. Shame flickered, quickly hidden. No one wanted to see themselves in his words, but they were there, clear and unavoidable. When he spoke of hunger, of sleeping in cold places, of learning to make himself small, Mara's throat tightened. She remembered how she had done the same in her own way right here. The beggar paused often, his strength limited. Each truth cost him effort. But he did not stop. "I am not here to punish anyone," he said. "I only wanted to rest." Silence followed. It was heavy, pressing, filled with things no one wanted to say out loud. An elder finally spoke, his voice strained. "If what you say is true." The beggar looked at him calmly. "It is." The simplicity of that answer left no room for argument. Mara felt something shift inside her, a painful loosening. She saw clearly now why she had been unable to turn him away. His truth echoed her own wounds, her own loss of place and voice. That night long ago, when she had needed help, she had also been inconvenient. A reminder of something the village preferred to forget. The beggar's presence made forgetting impossible. Outside, murmurs rose again, different now. Quieter. Uncertain. People argued softly. Some denied hearing anything new. Others looked shaken, forced to remember choices they had buried under routine. The beggar leaned back, exhausted. Mara placed a hand on his arm. "You don't have to say more today," she said gently. He nodded, eyes closing. But the truth had already done its work. The village could no longer see him as a stranger who wandered in by chance. He was a mirror. A reflection of what happened when order mattered more than justice. And that reflection was uncomfortable. As evening approached, the air felt charged, restless. Conversations lingered longer than usual. The elders did not return to their usual seats beneath the fig tree. Accountability hung unspoken, heavy as the coming night. The beggar slept again, unaware of the storm his quiet honesty had stirred. Mara watched him breathe, her heart full and aching at once. She knew what came next would not be easy. Truth rarely was. But it had been spoken. And once spoken, it could not be taken back. The truth did not fade with the beggar's sleep. It lingered in the village like a thick fog, settling into every path and doorway. People spoke in low voices long after night fell, their conversations unfinished, their thoughts unsettled. What had been said inside Mara's house could not be neatly folded away. It demanded a response. By morning the village felt divided. Groups formed near the fig tree, though the elders did not sit as they usually did. Some villagers stood close to them, nodding in agreement, insisting nothing had truly changed. Others kept their distance, arms crossed, faces tight with doubt. "He's only one man," someone said. "Stories can be twisted." "But what if he's telling the truth?" another asked quietly. Arguments rose and fell like uneven waves. No one shouted. The tension did not need loud voices. It lived in the spaces between words, in the way people avoided each other's eyes. Mara watched from her doorway. She had not meant to become part of this. She had not asked for attention or leadership. Yet her name was spoken often now, sometimes with respect, sometimes with blame. She made him a symbol. "She thinks she's better than us. She did what none of us would." The beggar remained inside, resting. His strength was returning slowly, but the weight of what he had shared had already shifted the ground beneath the village. The elders finally called for a gathering. It had been years since such a meeting was held openly, without routine or celebration to soften it. People gathered reluctantly, standing rather than sitting, unsure of where they belonged. An elder stepped forward, his voice measured. "We must restore order," he said. "This unrest helps no one." A murmur of agreement followed, but it was weaker than before. Another villager spoke, a farmer with dirt still beneath his nails. "Order for who?" he asked, his voice rough. "For those who never had to sleep outside?" The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Faces turned sharply toward him. Speaking like that had once been unthinkable. Now it felt necessary. The elders stiffened. "We have rules for a reason." "So did the village he came from," someone replied. Silence fell. Old wounds began to open. A woman spoke of her brother, sent away after speaking against a decision that ruined his livelihood. A man admitted he had once turned away a neighbor out of fear. Others stood quiet, guilt written plainly across their faces. Denial fought hard. "He chose his fate. We can't help everyone. We did what we had to." But remorse pushed back, slower but stronger. "We did nothing," a younger woman said, her voice trembling. "That's worse." The elders shifted uneasily. Their authority, once solid and unquestioned, now felt fragile. People no longer waited for their approval to speak. Mara stepped forward without planning to. She stood at the edge of the group, hands clasped tightly. All eyes turned to her. "I did not help him to shame anyone," she said quietly. "I helped because I remembered what it felt like to be left outside." Her words were simple, but they landed hard. Some looked away. Others nodded slowly. The beggar's truth had given language to feelings long buried. His presence had forced the village to see what it had become. Forgiveness did not come easily. Some villagers apologized openly, their voices breaking. Others refused, crossing their arms, clinging to old beliefs. Change frightened them more than guilt. "We cannot undo the past," an elder said carefully. "But we must decide what kind of village we will be now." That question split the crowd. Some wanted to return to routine, to forget this discomfort as quickly as possible. Others saw the moment as rare and necessary, a chance that might not come again. The beggar, weak but awake, appeared at the doorway, supported by Mara. His presence quieted the crowd instantly. "I did not come to break your village," he said softly. "It was already broken. I only showed you the cracks." No one argued. The village stood at a crossroads, though no path was clearly marked. Change would mean admitting fault. Would mean risk. It would mean opening doors that had long been shut. Returning to the old ways would be easier. Familiar. Safe. But safety had already cost them too much. As the gathering slowly broke apart, nothing was resolved, yet nothing was the same. Conversations continued in smaller groups. Choices waited to be made. Mara returned to her home exhausted. She sat beside the beggar, watching the light shift through the doorway. For the first time she felt something like hope, though it was fragile and uncertain. The village had looked at itself. Whether it would turn away again remained to be seen. Change did not arrive like dawn. It came slowly, unevenly, like a wound that refused to close all at once. The village did not wake one morning transformed. Habits held on tightly, and fear did not disappear simply because truth had been spoken. The days that followed were quiet but not peaceful. The beggar remained in Mara's home. His strength returned in small steps. Some mornings he could sit without support. Other days, pain bent him low again, reminding everyone that survival left marks no kindness could fully erase. His hands trembled when the cold returned at night. His eyes sometimes darkened with memories he did not share. Mara learned the shape of patience. She rose early to prepare food. She listened when he spoke and stayed silent when he could not. Caring for him was not heroic or grand. It was tiring. Ordinary. Real. And in that ordinariness, something steady grew between them. Outside, the village struggled. Some villagers began leaving food at Mara's door without saying a word. Others offered medicine or firewood, standing awkwardly, unsure whether to stay or go. A few avoided her house entirely, crossing the path to keep their distance. Kindness, when it appeared, was fragile. Arguments still flared near the fig tree. Old habits resisted change. Some elders softened, allowing discussions they would have silenced before. Others grew defensive, clinging harder to their authority. Not everyone stayed. A few families packed their belongings and left quietly, unwilling to live in a place that questioned itself. Their departure was noticed but not stopped. Mara felt the weight of her choice daily. Some greeted her warmly now, thanking her for her courage. Others met her eyes with cold resentment. She had disturbed the balance, and balance had always favored those in power. At night, doubt crept in. She wondered if she had done more harm than good. If the village would splinter beyond repair. If she had mistaken a single act of kindness for a solution. The beggar noticed her silence. "You carry too much," he said one evening, his voice stronger now, though still rough. "So do you," she replied. They shared a quiet understanding. Healing was not a straight path. It twisted and doubled back, demanding more than anyone expected. The beggar began to walk short distances, leaning heavily on his stick. Children watched him with curiosity rather than fear. Some asked questions. Some simply walked beside him, their small presence a gentle kind of protection. Scars remained. His body bore them plainly. The village carried its own, though they were harder to see. Trust had been damaged long before he arrived. Rebuilding it required more than good intentions. Mara faced consequences she had not anticipated. An elder confronted her one afternoon, his voice tight. "You have changed things," he said, not accusing, not praising. "You must understand that change has a cost." "I know," she answered quietly. She had paid costs before. This time the price felt worth bearing. Slowly, imperfectly, the village adjusted. Meetings were held where voices long ignored were finally heard. Decisions took longer. Arguments grew louder. It was messy, but it was honest. The beggar rested often, watching it all unfold with tired eyes. "I did not expect this," he admitted once. "I only hoped to survive." Mara smiled faintly. Sometimes survival is enough to start something. As weeks passed, routines shifted. A place was set aside for travelers. Food was shared more carefully. Not generously but intentionally. Small steps. Not everyone changed. Some still crossed the road to avoid Mara. Some refused to look at the beggar. Forgiveness, when offered, was uneven and incomplete. But something had broken open that could not be sealed again. Healing did not erase the past. It did not remove scars. It taught the village how to live with them. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air cooled, Mara sat beside the beggar and watched children play in the distance. Their laughter felt fragile but real. "We are not finished," she said. "No," he agreed. "But we have begun." The village stood in that uncertain space between what it had been and what it might become. Change was slow, painful, incomplete, but it was happening. And that, at last, was something no one could deny. Time moved differently in the village after the beggar's arrival. The change was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like the shift of tides beneath the surface. Days flowed into weeks and weeks into months, but the memory of that single night lingered like a pulse, steady and unignorable. The villagers began to see the edges of their own habits. Doors that had once closed instinctively now stayed slightly ajar. Children no longer flinched when they saw strangers. Farmers offered small gestures of help without being asked. Women spoke more freely in gatherings, their voices no longer only whispers carried through fear. Change was uneven, often hesitant, but it was real. Mara's door, once half closed, now stayed open. The beggar, no longer just a man in need, but a symbol of the village's own conscience, moved more freely among them. He walked with a quiet dignity, leaning on his stick but no longer defined by weakness. Some villagers avoided him still, but many treated him as they would any elder, with respect if cautiously at first. Inside Mara's home, the relationship between her and the beggar had grown into something steady. They had no need for grand declarations or dramatic gestures. Their bond was in shared quiet moments, preparing simple meals, tending a small hearth, listening to the wind through the cracks in the walls. It was in small acts of trust, the kind that cement slowly like mortar between stones. The village itself had begun to transform, though slowly. Meetings were longer, voices more numerous, and decisions no longer made solely by the elders. Rules were examined. Old prejudices were questioned. Where once the poor had been invisible, they now had small places to speak. Change was imperfect, sometimes messy, sometimes faltering, but it had taken root. Not all acts of kindness were followed immediately by recognition. Some villagers still crossed the street to avoid confrontation. Some refused to meet the beggar's gaze, some whispered behind hands and doors. But others began to follow his example, small gestures echoing outward. A cup of water for a traveler, a blanket for someone shivering, a word of reassurance whispered in fear. Each act, however tiny, chipped away at the long-held cruelty and silence that had defined the village for generations. The beggar too changed in ways subtle and profound. Though his body carried scars from his past, his spirit seemed lighter. Where he had once moved with caution, he now carried himself with a quiet assurance. He spoke to children, telling stories of endurance and courage. He walked the paths Mara had once walked alone, showing the villagers that kindness and dignity could coexist even in hardship. His presence became a living reminder that empathy was not weakness, and that the village itself had the capacity to grow beyond fear. Mara too found herself renewed. The grief and isolation that had defined her life began to soften, replaced by a steady purpose. She no longer measured herself by past shame or loss. She measured herself by small, tangible acts, tending to the beggar, helping neighbors, listening when others spoke. The village no longer felt like a cage but a community she could help shape. Her pain had not vanished, but it had transformed, tempered by resilience and tempered by hope. Even as the village changed, some reminders of the past remained. Not all wounds healed. Not all mistrust disappeared. Occasionally, a voice would rise in anger or a door would close suddenly, a child would question the old rules, or a villager would fall back into old habits. But these moments were no longer accepted as inevitabilities. They were challenges, small tests of the new conscience that had begun to spread. The elders, once unquestioned, learned to listen in ways they had not before. They discovered that authority earned through fear could no longer hold. Some resisted, some adapted, and some left quietly, unable to bear the uncertainty that the beggar and Mara had forced into the village's daily life. The community, however, persisted, imperfect but determined to uphold a new standard of care and awareness. The beggar in particular became a subtle teacher. Not with lectures or scolding but through presence and example. His resilience, his willingness to endure, and his quiet acceptance of the village's slow pace of change became a guide for those willing to follow. Mara watched as villagers slowly embraced empathy, realizing that kindness, once offered openly, did not diminish anyone's life but enriched all. Months passed and life gained a new rhythm. Crops were tended with renewed care, laughter returned to corners of the village, and the rhythm of work and rest held new meaning. Mara found herself smiling more often, feeling warmth she had long denied herself. The beggar's presence became a constant reassurance that survival was possible and that compassion could be stronger than fear. And yet, the village never forgot the lessons of that night. Doors remained open, but eyes remained vigilant. Conversations became more honest, and the elders, now tempered by the experience, carried a quiet humility in their actions. The memory of the beggar's arrival, the choice Mara had made, and the change that had followed, lingered like a shadow and a light at once. A reminder that human hearts could bend toward mercy if given the chance, but that vigilance was required to maintain it. In time, the village came to a quiet understanding. Compassion was not a single act, nor was change immediate or complete. It was a process, slow and deliberate, a series of choices made over and over. What remained after kindness was not perfection, but endurance. Not certainty, but hope. Not unbroken peace, but a community willing to confront its flaws and learn from them. Mara stood at her doorway one evening, the beggar beside her, watching children play in the fading light. Their laughter was uneven, their steps uncertain, but it was real. The village had changed. Not completely, not perfectly, but in ways that mattered. And in that moment, Mara understood fully that what remained after kindness was not simply survival or gratitude. It was the quiet, steady pulse of a village learning to care for itself, for one another, and for anyone who arrived at its doorstep. The lessons of mercy, courage, and empathy had taken root. The work was far from over, but the foundation had been laid. For the first time in years, Mara felt a peace that was not fragile. It was steady. It was earned. And it promised that, however imperfectly, the village could continue to grow toward something better. Years passed, and the village wore its history lightly, yet it never forgot the night that had begun the slow unraveling of its old ways. Mara's home, once the edge of isolation and shame, became something different entirely. A place of quiet witness, a threshold where the village learned that courage and compassion could exist together. Her door, once half closed in fear and hesitation, now stayed open as a symbol of both challenge and hope. The beggar, no longer merely a visitor, no longer a stranger, walked freely through the village. His body bore the marks of hardship, but his presence was steady, patient, and deliberate. Children no longer flinched from him. They ran past his stick-worn path, laughing, asking him questions, listening to his stories. Even the elders, who had once held authority with fear, came to sit quietly beside him, learning from the wisdom that endurance could offer. He had become both a teacher and a reminder of the cost of silence, of the necessity of kindness, and of the fragility of unchecked order. Mara herself had transformed alongside him. Her grief and isolation had softened, replaced by purpose that was neither loud nor boastful. She walked through the village each day with a sense of peace rooted in experience, in knowing that courage was not always an act of grand heroism, but often the sum of small, consistent choices. Her home became a sanctuary for those in need, travelers, the poor, or anyone whose heart carried the weight of the world. She offered what she could, expecting little, receiving gratitude in ways that were quiet, fleeting, yet profound. The villagers had not become perfect, and they had not forgotten the past. Habits and fears still lingered in corners of their minds. Some villagers clung stubbornly to old rules and routines. Others left, unable to remain in a place that demanded self-reflection. But the village had changed in ways that mattered. Conversations grew longer, decisions more deliberate, and listening became a skill as valued as authority. Empathy was no longer optional, it was necessary. The door, open to all, became a living symbol. Mara did not speak of it or decorate it, it required no ceremony. Its significance was understood without words. A traveler arriving at her doorstep, a villager carrying news, a child asking a question, all were met with the same quiet openness. It was a door that invited life in its most human forms. The wounded, the curious, the cautious, and even the fearful. The beggar's role in the village evolved as well. No longer only the survivor of misfortune, he became a mentor of sorts, teaching through example rather than instruction. His patience, his resilience, and his capacity for compassion offered a subtle lesson. The measure of a person is not in what they have lost, but in how they rise after loss. Villagers began to approach him not with fear, but with the tentative respect reserved for those who had endured and survived. And in return he gave quietly, never demanding, always observing, letting people learn on their own. Mara watched the village grow into this new rhythm with a quiet pride. She saw small acts of kindness ripple outward. A farmer sharing water with a stranger, a mother quietly comforting a crying child, a neighbor offering firewood to someone too weak to gather it themselves. None of these acts were grand or revolutionary, yet each one chipped away at the old patterns of neglect, judgment, and fear. They were imperfect, hesitant, but persistent, and that persistence was what mattered. And still there were reminders of what had been. The memory of that first night lingered, a ghost hovering near the edges of the village's consciousness. Discomfort surfaced in whispered disagreements, in a door slammed too quickly, in a glance of fear or suspicion. But no one could return entirely to the old ways. The door had been opened, and it remained open. It had become a measure of the village's character, a reminder that the cost of closing one's heart was far higher than the cost of extending it. Mara often stood there in the evening, the beggar at her side, watching the village settle into the quiet hum of ordinary life. The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows that danced across the path. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the fields. Women carried baskets home, talking in voices lighter than they had been in years. Men returned from the fields, their faces tired but softened by the small victories of the day. And Mara, with the beggar beside her, felt something she had not known for a long time, a sense of belonging, shared and complete. The door never closed again. It did not need to. Its openness had become a symbol of courage, a reminder of the choices that had shaped the village. It had witnessed fear and hesitation, suffering and survival, compassion and growth. And in that witness, it had become sacred. The beggar's presence too endured. Not as an interruption or a disruption, but as a quiet cornerstone. People came to him not only to ask for help, but to see proof that life, however cruel or unfair, could be met with dignity. He did not offer easy answers, only an example of resilience, and that example was enough. Mara understood now that their journey was never about saving a village from itself. It was about showing what was possible when one door opened and stayed open, regardless of fear. And so, life continued, imperfect but full of intention. The village had learned that change was not a single act, nor could it be commanded. It was cumulative, quiet, relentless. It was in the small gestures that repeated day after day. In every cup of water given, every blanket shared, every voice allowed to speak. And in all of it, Mara's open door remained at the center, a beacon and a challenge, a reminder that humanity could survive and flourish when courage and compassion were chosen over fear and judgment. The village did not forget the beggar or the night he arrived, nor did it forget Mara's courage. But they also learned that remembering was not enough. Living differently was what mattered. And as the years passed, the open door became more than a symbol. It became a habit, a way of life, a standard. It remained open through storms and sunshine alike, welcoming all who came, silently teaching that kindness, once given, could never be undone. In the soft light of evening, Mara stood at that threshold, the beggar beside her, both witnesses and participants in the life they had helped shape. The village hummed quietly around them. Children laughed, elders watched, and neighbors worked side by side. The door had been opened and had stayed open, not for ceremony, not for spectacle, but for the simplest, most human reason of all, to offer refuge, to honor dignity, to choose compassion. And in that choice the village learned what it meant to be alive together. Not perfect, not unscarred, but present, aware and capable of love. The door never closed again, and neither did the hearts it had inspired.